Well, you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little bit out of focus. I hope you can see it in focus, but my eyes are glazed over from the brightness and the sharp picture on that video board at Canada Life Place in London. How much money? How many millions on that score clock? Unreal. What a treat. That thing's fantastic. I think I watched more of the game on the score clock than I did on the ice, Dan Mahar.
Well, I've heard the London Knights have money, so why not, right? Why not enhance it for your fans?
Hey, listen, if that was London Knights, aka Hunter money going into the score clock, they should have just had their own highlight reel running the whole time, or just a big picture of Dale. That's what I would do. I would just put a picture of me on that score clock and make you stare at it for 60 minutes of hockey. Truly, though, the thing is utterly spectacular. Not lost on me as we get this episode underway is we talked about two teams last week, one in the West and one in the East, and we were surprised for different reasons with both teams. The Flint Firebirds. What's going on with Flint? We thought they'd be better. And what do? They go and have a 2-0 week, although wins over Owen Sound and Sarnia. Let's not, have a ticker tape parade yet. And then on the other side, the Kingston Frontenacs running near the top of the conference, running near first place. And all of a sudden, they have an 0-for-3 weekend in Southern Ontario, losing in Kitchener, then in Guelph, then in Brantford, 10-1, and suddenly they've lost 6 of 7. Is it the curse of the OHL podcast, Dan? I don't know.
Well, I think, the first two games, both they got a point. Kitchener and OT, Guelph in a shootout. So we'll call those games decent performances. Then you got your old 3-3. Their best defenseman gets thrown out early in the game for a major penalty with Quentin Burns leaving, and it was just disarray from there. So I'm going to give him a pass on the 10-1, Mike. But yeah, not a great weekend.
The 3-3 didn't seem to bother the London Knights. 2 games against the Windsor Spitfires, and then despite missing 3 key players, including their top defensive pairing with Oliver Bonk and Sam Dickinson, they're also without Easton Cowan at the World Juniors, and they still handled things against the Kitchener Rangers on Sunday. So I don't know. I worry about the 3-3 excuse, if you will, but certainly a bad finish to the weekend for Kingston, and the opposite for the London Knights, who won 2 of 3.
Yeah, although you saw that game as well. I think the 3-3 was semi-valid based on how the Knights played in the second half of that game. It was pretty. The ice was pretty tilted in Kitchener's favor towards the end. They just couldn't figure out a way to score. But yeah, the good teams find a way to win, Mike. Good teams find a way to not have an excuse when it's a 3-3, even though we know it is to some extent. But it doesn't mean you have to lose the game.
Before we dive into our meat and potatoes this week and a couple of coaching changes to talk about, do you want to defend the honor of Kitchener Rangers fans, Dan? You and I got into some text messaging on Saturday, and you insist to me that it's a louder crowd than any of us knuckleheads up on press row seem to realize.
Well, I just added a caveat, an audio caveat to the complaints from Press Row that the building is quiet, and that is that I have sat up in those blue seats up near the press box, in under the rafters, and it seems like there's a bit of a sound vacuum up there. I always found it really dead up there. From an acoustic standpoint, when you're up there, you don't feel part of the crowd. You don't hear a lot of noise. When you're in the main bowl, I don't find it nearly as bad. It's not the most raucous crowd ever, but I think there's a lot more life when you're kind of lower. That's all. Just a caveat.
You got to admit that the crowd in Kitchener, and I've been going my entire life, is not the same crowd it was circa 2008, for example.
Absolutely, but the league isn't either, I would say. And I'm not trying to bring this all back down to the physicality and fighting and some of the shenanigans that went on back then, but that certainly brings an element out in the crowd, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I suppose it does. And I think we're starting to go back in that direction with the game. You and I have talked about that on this podcast before. I did hear the fans spontaneously get into a Go Rangers Go chant on Friday night in that game versus Kingston. I always like to hear that because I think home ice should be an advantage. And there are 2 things I really dislike. One is piped in sound that's turned up to 11 when it comes to the volume. That's not the kind of loud I want in an arena. The organic sound from the crowd is what I like. And I like it when the crowd starts it spontaneously as opposed to waiting for the team to give them a reason to cheer.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, on the piped in sound, I remember this game about 4 or 5 years ago when the Cincinnati Bengals were still terrible. End of season, playing another 3-12 team or something. We knew the stadium was half empty. They just weren't showing the top half, and piped in noise just made it sound like it was the Super Bowl in overtime. So the piped in noise is so phony. Yeah, you like to have a little atmosphere. It doesn't bother me if it's not a complete nutso crowd, but yeah, you like to have a little atmosphere, and the product plays into that. I think for sure.
As a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, maybe I shouldn't go down this road because we just lost the Battle of Pennsylvania today. But are you telling me the Cincinnati Bengals are not still a terrible team? Just curious. I don't know.
Well, I was told, I was promised they were a Super Bowl favorite going into this year, Mike. So they could still pull it out with their 4 wins or whatever it is at this point. No.
All I know is the Steelers lost today, and that disappoints me as we record this on a Sunday evening. But enough of the NFL. This is the OHL podcast. I'll tell you what, one of these coaching changes is more surprising than the other, but both, I think, raise eyebrows here amongst the duo on this pod. Michael Haley out as an assistant in Sarnia, and Steve O'Rourke out as the head coach in Oshawa. Just by way of a bit of background, for those who may not know, Michael Haley played for the Sarnia Sting for 178 games and then went on to 274 in the National Hockey League. He was hired at the beginning of the 21-22 season, so 3 seasons and a bit for Haley as an assistant, gone. And O'Rourke joined Oshawa in 2022 and was with Derek Laxdal for a couple of years before moving into the headman's role, became the 36th head coach in Oshawa Generals history. And despite sitting first place in his division, turfed this week. Which one do you want to start with, Dan? O'Rourke or Haley?
You know what? Let's start with O'Rourke. Uh, just because I think you and I both flagged in the preseason predictions that Oshawa was supposed to be a contender this year, a top end contender, and they are. They're loaded for bear. They've gone out and made some moves. This is a team that you cannot let it ride if you don't have top end coaching as well. And I'm not saying Steve O'Rourke wasn't. I'm just saying there maybe was a shorter leash on a first time coach there, taking over when Laxdal left. Things weren't going that well early in the season. So you bring in Brad Malone on the bench. Things seem to improve. And it looks like maybe ownership just said, this is the guy, this is the voice for the room. So let's pull the trigger now while things are still early. But that was definitely an interesting move. But it appeared that for a new coach, you had a little less rope than some might have.
16 wins in their past 21 games. And I know your point on bringing in Malone is valid insofar as the team starts to kind of find its legs, but these things usually begin and end with the head coach. And so the head coach would get more credit, one would assume, than the new assistant. But nonetheless, I don't know how much shorter a leash one could have. What I will point out in all of this is that Brad Malone finished his pro career with the Bakersfield Condors. The last couple of seasons he played in the American League. And on that Condors team was none other than a young man by the name of Tyler Tullio, who just so happens to be the son of the owner of the Oshawa Generals. I wonder how much that relationship, Tullio Malone, had to play in all of this. I find it shocking, quite frankly, that O'Rourke became a sacrificial lamb so early in a season when the team had certainly righted the ship. Again, 16 wins in his past 21. And then poor Brad Malone comes in and drops back-to-back games. They did win to finish out the weekend over Brampton, but they dropped games to Peterborough and North Bay. Yikes. So anyway, I'm still a little bit puzzled by this one in Oshawa.
Yeah, it's definitely puzzling. And the only thing we can say with certainty on any of these things, Mike, is that there's always more to the story than meets the eye. We know what we can infer up front, that maybe they weren't thrilled with the start. Maybe they panicked. Maybe they just really liked what they saw from Brad Malone when he came in. There's always more to it. You mentioned the personal relationships. Who knows what the philosophical disagreements might have been between O'Rourke and the ownership, or O'Rourke and Malone. Who knows? So there's always more to it. It's hard to speculate, but definitely what meets the eye. There's a little more to those stories every time, like I'm sure there is in Sarnia as well.
O'Rourke's playing resume includes a stop with the Muskegon Fury. Maybe he can go coach there, so when they join the OHL next year, he's right back in this league. We shall see. I just kid on that front. You mentioned Michael Haley and Sarnia, and what makes this one curious, Dan, too, is that usually it's a head coach that gets fired, and then if an assistant is getting fired, it's because the new head coach wants his own guys there, or girls, as the case may be, because we're bringing women into coaching positions now. But Michael Haley out as an assistant in Sarnia after 3 and a bit seasons there. It suggests to me, just by the way it went, if you're not going after the head coach, either whatever responsibilities Michael Haley had weren't up to snuff, or again, something else that's behind the scenes, relationship wise or politics wise, or whatever the case may be, leads to Michael Haley's departure from Sarnia.
Yeah, again, speculation, right? But we can make some fairly educated guesses. The power play has been miserable there. So some of the responsibilities of the assistant coaches are things like that, where someone's not happy. But also, it could be something as simple as philosophical disagreement between the head coach and the assistant coach. And if they're not on the same page, one of them's got to go. Letang has seems to have a fair bit of rope in Sarnia as well. Fairly well thought of by ownership group there. And if it was going to be, the expensive guy that we've signed on for a while, or the other guy, let's see if that works first. Who knows? Lots of speculation, but yeah, it's rare to see an assistant coach dropped mid-season like this while everyone else stays. But I think the way things were going in Sarnia, they probably felt something had to change.
This harkens back to last season, which by about this point, I think we had 5 coaching changes already made. And a lot of people were raising eyebrows about the stability or lack thereof in the coaching ranks in the Ontario Hockey League. So this isn't that. But I guess it's a reminder that we operate in a results oriented business. And parents, don't let your kids grow up to be sports coaches.
Well, or if you do, just don't plan on seeing them every Christmas, because they're going to have a new address every 2 years.
Just make sure the mail continues to get forwarded, unless you're in Canada and the mail is not even being delivered right now. But that's a whole other story. Speaking of Canada, half of Team Canada's final cuts for the World Juniors are OHL'ers. We're going into the inbox to talk about a new age for OHL hockey, and we have got your wraparound coming up on this episode of the OHL podcast. The 24-25 NHL season still has that new car smell, and the action is heating up on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. It is super easy for first-timers to get started at DraftKings Sportsbook. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. And if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. When you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Dan, final cuts made at Team Canada's World Junior Camp, and among the 8 names, 4 of them belong to Ontario Hockey League players. Beckett Seneca, Zane Perek, Denver Barkey, and Cam Allen all cut. Now, I should note as we get into this, the OHL is represented by 14 players with Hockey Canada at this World Junior, the most in more than 40 years. So the league really representing. But what do you think of any or all of those 4 names, Seneca, Perek, Barkey, and Allen, not making the final roster?
Well, I'll say right off the top, I think the one that probably bothers me the most is Seneca. I think he has everything you need to play on that team. If you're struggling to score late in that tournament, everyone's going to always talk about who's not there that should have been there, that is a prolific scorer. In terms of the other 3, terrific players in their own right, but when you're building a team, the struggle is always to understand what components you're bringing to the table. And you see a player like Cole Baudouin there. You want a fearsome penalty killer, a guy that you can put on in the tough minutes, win those battles. You see a guy like Jet Luchenko with the wheels and the kind of all-purpose play. He can, so it's not always about points. And you look at Andrew Gibson making it on the D, probably a little safer, stronger bet than Cam Allen has been in the last 2 years, really. If you look at how he's developed and how he can shut down minutes and clear that crease. So you're looking for blends, you're looking for components, you're looking for handedness, right and left. Sometimes you're looking for chemistry with other players. So I think this is always a point of contention every year, Mike, when Team Canada makes its cuts. You say, well, how can you cut that guy? Like the leading scorer in the WHL, Andrew Crystal cut. And it's a well-rounded player they're looking for and how they fit into the chemistry of the roster. So I wouldn't say any of those shock me, Mike. The other thing is they tend to have favorites coming in, guys who have played for Hockey Canada previously, guys they thought stood out the summer camp. And if you weren't in that list and you're trying to make it late, like some of these players were, like back at Seneca, it's tougher. So uh, I wouldn't say I'm shocked ever by anything they do, Mike, but of those four, I think Seneca's the one that really caught my eye.
When you talk about Cam Allen, it's not lost on me, Dan, that you're talking about the last couple of years and where he's sort of been at. And I know injury has played a part, but remember when this kid came into the league and he came into it like a house on fire. Everybody knew it. You're already talking, blue chip first rounder coming up, and then things just they've gone a little bit sideways, to be honest, for Cam Allen right now.
Yeah, and you look at a guy. There's the opposite of what I just talked about with the pedigree with Team Canada. You talked about a guy who's captain on the under 17 team, the under 18 team. One of their go to guys was expected to be potentially a top 10 NHL pick, and just things went so wrong for Cam Allen over the last little while with injuries and just sporadic play in Guelph. Fell to a fifth round pick in the NHL. Starting to get it back a bit this year as a 19-year-old in the league, starting to feel it a bit again, but still not anywhere near where people thought he was going to be at this age. So I think it was kind of, we have a history with this guy. Let's bring him to camp. But people just played their way past him, in my opinion.
When it comes to Denver Barkey, don't overlook the fact that he battled a bout of mono early in the season, may have set him back just a little bit, not being as prolific as might have been expected, or maybe just not having that 100% health that you'd want in a short tournament like this. Zane Perek, we talked about him initially as one of those snubs. He gets added to the team late, but there's a high risk, high reward player. And maybe what Hockey Canada is looking for is something obviously lower risk with at least a high ceiling type of reward. And then on Seneca, it's another interesting case. And I hear where you're coming from when you say of those four names, he's the one that surprises you the most. Of course, he was also a late addition to the roster. And in the between time, he had that highlight reel goal against the London Knights and Sam Dickinson when he undresses a guy who is on the team in Dickinson and scores just a world class goal. And everybody's thinking, how can this guy not be on Team Canada? I'm going to take a slightly different approach. And I acknowledge that in saying this, it's not exactly the kind of thing you might come to a podcast like this for. If you're looking for a hot take, I don't have it for you because what I want to say is this. And first of all, it's a great problem to have. I don't know if every nation has this same debate. Probably the most passionate hockey fans do. We always have this debate in Canada. But what we never talk about when we say, oh, this guy got snubbed or this guy should have made the team is okay, but then who's not going to be on the team? Who is on the team? Who made it that you think has to come off if you're putting your guy or guys onto the team? And we rarely get into that. So my cool take on all of this is we're not the ones assembling the team. Hockey Canada has chosen Dave Cameron and the staff to put this together. They know what they're looking for, be it handedness, be it lower risk, be it whatever in terms of building a team. The bottom line is we have got a ton, and I mean a ton of options in this country for great players to perform in this tournament over Christmas, and we're all going to cheer them on. And we can dissect and debate later on. Last year, one of the storylines that emerged afterwards is why didn't Carson Rakoff get used more because he was used sparingly and seemed to be quite effective, etc. It might be a case of why didn't Gretzky get to take the shootout at the Olympics? All these things we can talk about afterwards, but going in, you tell me the guy you're taking off the team, and then we can have the discussion about who you want on it or who you think got snubbed from it.
That's a great point. We talk about that. This guy should have been on or that guy should have been on, but who are you replacing? And these are all, you're talking the best 20 U20 players in the country. And when you talk about that too, and I tried to look at the players from the OHL that are there versus some that got cut, Mike. And the one factor that I kind of ferreted out as one of the consistent themes was discipline and playing with a structure. And the players that are on that team all have that in spades. The players they cut, I'm not saying don't have it. Obviously, you play at this level, you know how to play with some structure, but tend to be players that kind of run outside of the system a bit, or take some penalties at inopportune times. And maybe grasping for straws here, but I see a little bit of a difference there in terms of who they took versus who they left off. And in a short tournament, you can't run into discipline problems. And when the going gets tough, you need the system to kick in, not have individual efforts. So we'll see if they got it right, Mike. But I don't think anyone's going to be disappointed with the guys they did take.
All right, let's dive into the inbox because, as usual, we're getting great feedback, ideas, and questions from you at ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Keep them coming. We love to hear from you anytime. Mike from Mississauga poses this question, Dan Mahar. The three-man overage rule came into effect almost 30 years ago, and by most accounts was designed to protect the CHL from losing talent to the NHL early. With the advanced skill level of 16 and 17-year-olds entering the league and 20-year-olds benefiting from ever increasing available opportunities to turn pro, play NCAA, etc., one might argue that the CHL could become an even stronger developmental league by eliminating overage players. There are many pros and cons, no doubt, but I'd love to hear your take on whether it might be time for the CHL to review its overage rules. That from Mike in Mississauga. Dan Mahar, what say you?
Well, I'm going to disagree on this one. I kind of hear what you're saying, Mike. But a couple points on this one. One, I believe that at this age level, the older players make your league better and higher caliber. On average, on weight. Yes, you get your dynamic 16, 17 year olds, and you get your older players that aren't really going anywhere in hockey. But generally speaking, age means a lot. You see the older teams in this league tend to do better. So those overagers lend some leadership, some maturity. They bring some of the younger players along. It's a great opportunity for some of those players to still play, get one last shot at getting noticed by pro, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think you'd see a stronger league if you made it younger, for partly what I just said about younger players aren't quite there yet. But also, you talk about, well, what impact would it have on AAA loops in Ontario at the younger ages if you're starting to siphon even more players up before they're ready. So I think if you shift that overall age in the league younger, the quality of play overall will suffer a little. And I think you might have unintended impacts at those levels as well. So I love what overagers bring to this league. I don't think three is unreasonable. I think it's a good blend in those dressing rooms. And I would not personally be in favor of that, Mike, but I know what you think.
Well, I tend to lean my fellow Mike's way here. In that, I'm not even sure it needs to be reviewed so much as this might just happen organically. And I say this having already been on record. We talked about this earlier in the season. I would be open to and have for a while creating a fourth overage spot to be used by a goaltender. So you don't get stuck in this position where one of them is quote unquote overage spots is wasted if it's a goaltender and you'd like to have those skaters out there. But when when Mike brings this up and he talks about those other opportunities that exist for players now, this is where I could potentially see something changing, even if the CHL doesn't officially make a rule change, because there are other opportunities. Maybe 20-year-olds are going to be more inclined to go the NCAA route if they haven't been drafted yet and they'd like to play a different kind of schedule in a different kind of environment, that sort of thing. And the NCAA opportunity is suddenly open to them. That just might be where they end up. But I could see potentially the Canadian Hockey League becoming a league of younger players, and the core of teams will be 17, 18, and 19-year-olds, or 18 and 19 will make up the bulk of championship rosters moving forward. So I don't know if the CHL revisiting this would be a preemptive strike, but I could honestly see this happening organically. And then what the Ontario Hockey or the Canadian Hockey League might want to consider is allowing for more 16-year-olds to be on a roster to help flesh it out with some of the best of the young talent.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many angles to this, though, right? Like you talk about we're guessing at what the impacts might be. One other thing to keep in mind too is not every player develops at the same time or at the same speed. And you talk about these kids coming out of their U16 year at the top of their class, getting top 3 round pick in the OHL draft, getting profile, getting the good scholarship deals, all those things. And then you see some players pass them towards their 18 and 19-year-old years. And we look at, well, I mentioned it last podcast, but you look at the Jackeye brothers, you look at some of these players that come in a little bit older into the league and then just take off. So those late bloomers, I think there's a whole wealth of talent out there to capture at all different levels. And I think if you start limiting or making rules that take away from that, you're going to miss out on some talent. You're going to miss out on some things that bolster your league. So I'm with you in the organic piece. If it's going to happen organically, we'll see what happens, see what comes of this new NCAA agreement. Do players leave for that? If you expand it to 4 overagers, like you said, do you have some more come up from different leagues that have more opportunity in the OHL? So lots of things could happen. I prefer to let it happen organically rather than ruling that they can't play, just because I think you're missing out on some talent if you do that.
But I think you might be looking at that then, Dan, through a slightly older, and by that I mean quickly becoming archaic, if you will, lens, as if the CHL or the OHL was the only development stream. I still maintain it's the best development league in the world, but with the NCAA rule change, so much more possibility is open for players. So who says that a 20-year-old can't develop exactly the way they want to develop in an environment that is not the CHL? That's kind of what I'm getting at, and I think that Mike from Mississauga is getting at.
100%. But can we not do that organically? Let the players that will go that route go, and let the ones that are going to stay in Ontario stay. I mean, make it their choice. I think one thing that's getting kind of overplayed in the NCAA argument too is there are only so many slots in the NCAA, and we'll see how that evolves over time. Historically, there haven't been a flood of these 20-year-old players coming from Canada. Playing time is tough to get there, especially if they're committing to a Canadian player. So I'm not sure that you're going to get this complete opening of the floodgates where overage players can just go willy nilly to the NCAA. I think there's going to be an awful lot of players that still want to be in the CHL and still look at that as their best spot for the time being, especially if you're going to be a fourth line or a healthy scratch on your NCAA program, or you could be a first liner in the OHL. These are all considerations. So again, I'm still with the organic. Let it happen organically. Let the players make the choice. Let's not limit it for them. This is an age of openness, is it not?
Yeah, it is, and I couldn't agree more. I'm not ready to commit to any sort of rule change. I think really this will sort itself out organically. How soon? I wouldn't even hazard a guess. Maybe a generation, but I have a feeling that that's just sort of a direction the league will organically, or hockey in general at this level for young men, will organically move. Okay, let's go to Paul's email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Absolutely love this one. Guys, love the podcast. I've been listening for 3 years now. You're like an original, Paul. We love you for that. I grew up in the capitalized Markham, Ontario, but have been living in America for a while. I live just outside of Flint, and I've been a devout Firebirds fan for years. Love to hear that. Every year in Flint, we have Flint Generals Night as a tribute to the IHL team that won 2 Colonial Cups here in the days of yore. So every year, the Firebirds players will wear retro Generals jerseys and play a game or two. I am conflicted, says Paul. On one hand, I think it's great to honor the hockey league or the hockey heritage in Flint, and I'm sure it helps sell some extra tickets and merchandise. On the other hand, the Generals were not an OHL team, and if anything, why not have the Plymouth Whalers throwback night? Seems like the Firebirds don't acknowledge Plymouth, even though that was where they were before they moved to Flint. Seems odd. During Generals Night, I hear fans in the stands essentially poop on the birds and praise a team that's no longer there. It's weird for this transplanted Canadian. Are there any other OHL teams who do this kind of thing? I welcome your thoughts. Thanks for all you do. Maybe we'll bump into each other at the Dort. Paul, I look forward to that. Oh, and P.S., since we're talking expansion, what about Markham as a site? I think somewhere in the GTA could be Markham, maybe. But I'll throw it to you, Dan, on the Flint Generals Tribute Night in Flint.
Yeah, no, Paul, it's an interesting topic because I have seen some teams do that. I'm just like just off the top of my head, I know that having the Owen Sound Platers having come from Guelph do the thing where they honor the logo and the Platers history. We see in the NHL the Carolina Hurricanes have Hartford Whalers night with their uniforms looking like that. So yes, you see some of these nostalgia things, and I'm not sure I have strong opinions one way or the other on whether or not it's good or bad. I think a team like the Flint Firebirds is probably struggling a little bit to come up with nostalgia and history based on their tenure there. But you do make a good point. Is if the Plymouth Whalers might be the one to celebrate there based on their history. But I think teams just are looking for marketing ideas here, and that's what you're looking at. So I don't love to hear the negativities surrounding the current team for sure, but I think it's just a marketing department initiative, Mike. Wouldn't you say?
If you're going to have, I will start by saying, a Plymouth Whalers tribute night in Flint, you better have Pete Krupski there, buddy. You better bring the Crupper into Flint for this. But yeah, that's the most unlikely scenario, right? Because the Plymouth Whalers are, yes, historically connected to the franchise, haven't been relocated from there, but they're the Firebirds now, not the Whalers. They're in Flint, so they're not going to celebrate another community. I'm leaning Dan's way on this. And Paul, I get that you're conflicted, and it does suck that some of the fans may be bird pooping all over the Firebirds during those nights. But I love stuff like this. I loved the Flint Tropics night that they did as a reference to, the Hollywood movie with Will Ferrell. We could go on, but this is a way selling some merchandise, honoring the hockey history in the city itself. So I'm pretty sure did North Bay not do a Centennials throwback night? I think they did. They're the battalion now, but there's a good history. Granted, that was an OHL team. I get that. But I look, I'm not there, so I appreciate your fandom and your passion for the Firebirds, but I love this. And teams are always looking for ways to get more eyes on the product and frankly, more merchandise sold in the store. And who wouldn't want a Flint Generals jersey? Come on. Go and get Dennis DeRosier to sign it for you. He played, I'm pretty sure he was one of the Generals players as well as the Saginaw Gears back in the day. So anyway, I kind of love it. It's all about the marketing machine. So okay by me.
Yeah, same. And you'll see it in other ranks too. The Brantford Bulldogs right now have came from
They just did.
Hamilton.
That's right, and they
Yeah,
just did an Alexander's, right?
exactly. They did an
Good
Alexander's night.
memory.
So yeah, so like you're seeing it around the league. It's yeah, it doesn't really offend me in either way, but yeah, you're trying to sell a few jerseys, right? A few shirts, a few hats.
And you're more likely, I mentioned North Bay, which of course was a team that relocated to Saginaw. So you might see Saginaw do something for the Gears, the old IHL team, but they're not going to do something for the North Bay Centennials that they used to be, right? You're just going to celebrate the history in that city. But listen, love the passion for the game, Paul. Love the passion for the Firebirds. And I look forward to seeing you at the Dort when we get there. Speaking of things that we see your team, and we take a look around the league at each and every team every week here on the OHL podcast, a little something we call the Wraparound. Dan, you are on Western Conference duty this week. You better be, because I did Eastern Conference, so I don't want to double up on that. Start us off, my friend.
All right, we'll start off with a little bit of a sour note in Erie, where they lost owner Jim Waters, beloved around the league. But the positive in this is that the team rallied on Saturday, a big 8-2 win. Sam Alfano with a hat trick. Callum Hughes, who recently came from West Cologne in the BCHL, already 7 points in his first 8 games, 2 goals in that game. If you're going to honor the man, that's the way to do it.
And more on Jim Waters coming up. We can't just leave it with a mention here in the Wraparound, but absolutely noteworthy for sure. All right, to Barrie, and you will hear the names Cole Baudouin, the forward, and defenseman Bo Akey, playing for Team Canada at the World Junior Hockey Championships. Akey also happens to hail from the beautiful little town of Baden, which is in the area where Dan and I live here in the region of Waterloo. Also from Barrie, forward Emil Hemming will suit up for his home country of Finland at the World Junior Hockey Championships.
Few Finnish players in the OHL this year.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so moving to Flint, you mentioned it earlier, Mike. A little bit of a better week, 5-4-1 in the last 10. And I always like to highlight players that fly a little under the radar in the league. So I wanted to give a shout out to Nolan Collins, a player who I know plus minus doesn't mean a lot to people, but here's a solid plus throughout his entire career on some teams where most of the players were not pluses. And to me, that stands out. Also, 14 points already in 27 games, on pace to really eclipse his career high of 26. Nolan Collins quietly doing the job in Flint.
If I can just hop back, I didn't want to interrupt you at the beginning of that. And great call on Nolan Collins, but you talked about the number of Finnish players in the OHL this year who are going to go and play for their home country at the World Juniors. The Finnish secret to success, so I learned from one of the Finns in London this weekend, is sisu. The Finns have the sisu, which is the secret sauce, which translates in English to grit. I don't know about you. Grit sounds a little grittier than sisu, but the Finns say they've got some sisu, and they're going to use that as their secret to success at the World Juniors. All right, as we continue on the wraparound to Brampton now, where some milestones this week. Alexander Stefan, Aiden Lane, and Martin Vachulik all scoring their first Ontario Hockey League goals. Luke Misa becomes the Steelheads franchise leader in assists with 132, passing Michael McLeod, and McGregor Richmond playing his 100th career Ontario Hockey League game. By the way, Brampton has lost 5 in a row, and they've also lost Carson Rakoff, Porter Martone, and Jack Ivankovic to Team Canada. It ain't going to get better quick in the GTA Brampton Steelheads.
Jacob Fibiger. We could go on. The list is bad there. So, yeah. So moving to Guelph, where things are also not ideal, but I always love to point out points in the season where corners starts to turn for the young players. And first round pick Alex McLean, 5 points in his last 5 games. This is right around the time of year you start to see some of these high end young players take off.
In Brantford, Blackhawks prospect Nick Lardis was in on both goals in a Bulldogs 2-1 overtime win over Barrie, and that gave Lardis 200 points in his OHL career. Also, another milestone, Czech defenseman Adam Juracek scoring his first OHL goal, and then thought, I liked how that worked. He scored another in Brantford's 10-1 thumping of Kingston, and we should also give a nod to Patrick Thomas, a Caps prospect who scored back-to-back OT winners for the Bulldogs this week. Not a bad week in Brantford.
Not bad. Right in our hometown in Kitchener, Mike, it's a comeback week. And what I mean by that is after losing coach Jussi Ahokas to a personal matter overseas for about a week, he returned to the bench this weekend, as did Carson Campbell on defense, who took a nasty hit in Windsor last week. Looked like he might miss some time. In true gritty, almost Finnish fashion, Carson Campbell was back this week.
Wait a minute. Are you saying Carson Campbell has some sisu?
I'm saying yes. Carson Campbell has some sisu.
I could not believe that he was back as quick as he was. He got rocked by Ethan Martin in that game in Windsor. But my broadcast partner, Paul Fixter, likes to call Carson Campbell Gumby because of his ability to bounce back from some bone-crushing body checks for sure.
Yeah.
Kingston is next on the Eastern Conference list. They were in Kitchener this weekend, and that's where Kieran Dervin made his OHL debut, coming up from St. Andrews College, where he had 30 points in 21 games. Dervin was a France 5th rounder in 2023, drafted out of the Pittsburgh Penguins elite program.
Nice. If you're going to scare people anymore about London, can I?
It's not possible. We could not possibly be more scared. Except, wait, put something big. Put Dale Hunter's face on that video board. No. I'm sorry. That's not nice.
Well, I'll try and scare you, Mike, if I can.
Okay.
They've won 21 of their last 23.
Is that all?
And they're doing it without anywhere near the production expected of Overager Jacob Julian, who had 78 points last year, on pace for just 37 this year, and a -10 on a team that has mostly pluses. So that's a kid that if he starts turning the corner again, like he did with his game-winning goal against Kitchener, they could be even more scary.
All right. I mean, I don't want to step on your Western Conference toes on the wraparound this week, Dan, but can I go scarier still?
Sure.
London Knights they're not done, right? This is the 05 London Knights insofar as they came so close last year. They're not messing around with the open window. They are going to do whatever it takes come January the 10th to give themselves the greatest possibility of winning not just the OHL championship this year, but the Memorial Cup again.
I agree. They're going to be
Yeah.
even scarier in a month from now.
All right, to Niagara. And how about this one? Ryan Rubrek picking up his second hat trick of the season in a win over North Bay. But this one was a natural hat trick, the good old natty hattie. Oh, but wait, not just a natural hat trick, but Rubrek getting the goals shorthanded on the power play and at even strength. That's the way to get a hat trick. He also had 2 assists in the game for good measure, a 5-point night in a win over North Bay.
Heck of a player there, not even draft eligible till next year. Moving to Owen Sound. I don't want to scare Owen Sound fans, but when you're third worst in the league with 124 goals against, the last thing you want to hear is that your all-star goaltender is going to be away. So the reins get turned over to Matthew Kaprowski and recently signed Trenton Bennett, 6'7" Trenton Bennett, to see if they can carry the load for a few weeks in the Sound.
Did you say that Carter George is getting traded to the London Knights? Is that what you meant? What?
Stop
No.
Stop it.
Okay, I'll stop it for now. But next week on this show, we're going to talk about the teams that are going to be wheeling and dealing come trade deadline time. Yeah. It's time for North Bay right now on the Wraparound, and that's where you find Ethan Procession, who's tied with Luca Pinelli for the league lead in power play goals with 11. Procession was taken by Anaheim in the 3rd round back in June. He leads the battalion with 32 points so far this season.
Heck of a player there, too. Okay, Saginaw fans, I promise I'm going to shut up about Michael Misa eventually, but in Saginaw this week, I just had to point out that this might be the most dominant season we've seen in a long time by any single player. Top 5 in the league for points, goals, assists, plus minus, shorthanded goals, and first goals of the game. That's a lot of categories to come top 5 in. So this is one heck of a dominant season we're witnessing from Michael Misa.
All right. Dan just promised he's going to stop pounding on Michael Misa's parade for now, but that's not the last you're going to hear of him in this episode. Little foreshadowing for you right there as we move to Oshawa on the Wraparound. Harrison Franson scored his first OHL goal, getting the lone marker in a loss to North Bay. Franson has played 33 games with the Jennies since being drafted in the 9th round back in 2022.
Excellent. And Mike, I can hold my promise. Remember I said I just hope I get to say something good about Sarnia this week?
I remember. I was thinking about it. I'm like, what's Dan going to come up with?
Thankfully, the Sting made it easy for me, snapping an 8-game losing skid with back-to-back wins against Owen Sound and Sioux. And wanted to point out, largely on the backs of 17-year-old Liam Beamish with 2 goals and 3 assists in those contests. A lot of talent in the younger age groups for the Sarnia Sting. So positivity coming. I told you, Sarnia.
Up in Ottawa, where the World Junior Hockey Championships will be hosted this Christmas season, and that's going to factor into this note. First of all, defenseman Henry Muse leads the 67s in scoring with 41 points, and he's just coming off a 7-game assist streak, during which he collected 13 helpers. Now, Luca Pinelli is going to play for Team Canada at the World Juniors. He also became a back-to-back teddy bear goal scorer for the Ottawa 67s as he got the fur flying on the weekend. And quick note on that, my colleague Kenny Walls, who calls games for the 67s on the radio, had 4, count them, 4 teddy bears, and he couldn't even make one of them to the ice. Like, his arm is that bad. And I like the broadcast location in Ottawa, if you can't hit the ice with a teddy bear from that broadcast perch, Kenny, I'm so disappointed in you. By the way, the 67s have just started a run of 9 in a row on the road, wrapping up on January the 5th to make way for the World Juniors. 9 in a row. The next home game for Ottawa is going to be on January the 8th against Brampton.
And if I could for just a second, I got to defend Kenny Walls because he didn't want to throw the Bears because there was a line brawl going on. He didn't want to hit the Grinch who was trying to break it up. I'm just saying, I'm defending Kenny.
How great was that? Line brawl breaks out as the teddy bears rain down on the ice. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. So switching way up north to the Sioux, they're going to be missing, like we said earlier, Andrew Gibson for a while, who's their rock, who they've struggled without. But a player who's caught my eye in his first couple contests there is recently signed Chase Reed. Won't even turn 17 till the end of the month. Looks poised, looks well-rounded. Came from the NAHL, having played in the USHL the previous year. Looks like you've got another gem on the back end, Sue.
All right, brace yourself as we go to Peterborough, because we were talking early in this season about perhaps an historically bad season. The Petes started 0 for their first 14. Win number 1 for the Petes came in game number 15. But currently, They have won 4 of their past 6. They've got points in 5 of those 6 games, and the only regulation loss was a 1-goal loss in Brantford. By the way, in those 5 games in which the Petes have collected at least a point, kid by the name of Easton Rye was playing goal for them.
I was just about to give a shout out to Easton Rye if you didn't, Mike. Things have turned with him and Gavin Bryant. Okay.
Good point. Yep.
And ending on Windsor, Mike, just want to point out they had the huge statement weekend, did they not? Back to backs with London. And the statement was both teams are good. They both won their home game. They were both close games. No huge news there, but I did want to point out Windsor had the response they were looking for. Dominated game 2, even though the score was only 3-2, held a 42-15 shot advantage. And yeah, I know London's missing a lot of players, but that's the kind of statement and pushback you want from Windsor if you're looking to send a message that you're here too and you're competing for that cup this year as well.
Just another reason that London ain't even close to done yet. And finally, to Sudbury in the Eastern Conference, where Kieran Walton is riding a 12-game point streak, 30 points on 10 goals and 20 assists in those dozen games. Walton was drafted by Winnipeg in the 6th round back in June. He leads the Wolves with 51 points on the season.
Yeah, can I just say that Kieran Walton has now had mentions, I think, in 3 or 4 straight podcasts. That tells me he is the steal of the last NHL draft. So
I thought you were going to make a John Boy reference or something.
No.
From the Waltons TV show. You're too young. I'm not. Good night, John Boy. Good night, Mary Ellen. Anyway, the Ontario Hockey League grieves the loss of a governor and a man who was so much more. And one of us did not look too hard for our prospect of the week this week. That's still to come on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. When it's time for the game, it is time for game time. Want to hear some squeak, squeak, swish at the basketball game tonight? Game time. The crack of helmets and shoulder pads at the football game? Game time. Sharp metal on ice and boards shuddering with body checks? Yeah, game time. Download the Game Time app today and get access to all of this and more. Concerts, theater, stand-up comedy, it's all on Game Time. When you open the app, just pick the event you want to see. You'll get a full range of pricing, and don't forget to look for the super deal. Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, gets you right to the good stuff so you don't have to waste time sorting through fluff. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code THPN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code THPN for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Dan, you referenced earlier the Erie Otters loss, and really it's a league-wide loss of owner of the Otters and Board of Governors member Jim Waters, who passed away suddenly this week at the age of just 73. So Jim Waters, before he became an owner and fulfilled really a lifelong dream, becoming an owner of a sports team, was the leader of one of the largest radio companies in Canada. It was a Waters family company, Chum Radio, and eventually sold to Bell Media in Canada, at which time Jim Waters was the president and CEO. So when that sale happened and the Waters family moved on from broadcasting, Jim got into the sports ownership business and purchased the Erie Otters and became an OHL governor. If you'll indulge me, I got a chance to know this guy well before he became an owner in the league. And I just wanted to share a little bit because there was a lot of outpouring on social media. There was moments of silence recognized before games in Kitchener and London that I was at on the weekend. I'm sure this happened league-wide. And just to give you a little sense of the man Jim Waters was. So I'll take you back to the early 1990s, and I'm in broadcasting school, and it's the end of our first year of school. And there's an awards banquet at the end of the year, and we were all encouraged to go so that we could network with people in the industry. And this might shock you because if you know me, you know how cheap I am. I'm like, I'm not going to pay. So I can't remember if it was 25 or $35, but It was a lot for a starving student back in the day. I'm like, why am I going to pay for a dinner when I'm already paying this much for this education? I'm going to go there and I'm going to schmooze with people. I don't want to schmooze with anybody. I just want to learn how to do radio and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I decided to go. My buddies and I, we're gonna go, and we're gonna go with a grudge. And we're just gonna sit there and we're gonna eat our dinner that we overpaid for, and then we're gonna go home. And Jim Waters was the guest speaker that night at that banquet. And so we go, my buddies and I, and we do exactly what we say we're going to do. And we're getting grumpier and grumpier. And finally, I decided, you know what? I spent this money on this evening. I should at least try to get something out of it by way of networking. So I went up after dinner and introduced myself to Jim Waters. And we had a very brief conversation. And what I remember most about it is the end. And I still feel like a doofus for it. But at the end of the conversation, he said, I really hope to see you in the business someday. And I said, you can count on it. And this is like first year broadcasting school. Should never have said something so bold. Things worked out okay. And here we are almost 30 years later. But the point of this story is that's the end. I'm a college kid. I just finished my first year. Fast forward 1 year later, it's the end of my second year. And I'm at the school over the summer break because in my third year, I'm going to be operating the radio station, and I wanted to get it set up so it was ready to go. So there I am. It's like some July day. I don't know what, but it's in the summertime. And I'm working at one end of the hallway outside the radio station. And at the other end of the hallway, with one of my teachers, walks in Jim Waters. And he stops and, like, picture a school corridor. That's how far apart we are. And he points down the hall and he says, hey, I remember you. And so I walk down the hall. We have a little chat. And Jim wasn't kidding. Like, Jim Waters, once he met you, he remembered you. He remembered your name. Every time I would see Jim Waters at a hockey game, he would come up, he would say hi, we'd have a hug or shake hands, or sometimes if on the air, he'd just come in behind me and strangle me from behind in a fun way. But this was the kind of guy that he was. When the Waters family sold Chum Radio, every single employee, regardless of full-time, part-time, or length of tenure, shared in the wealth that was generated by the sale. Everybody got something. And Jim carried this over into his sports ownership and board of governors life. And this is going to sound like a lie, the kind of story you just tell in a moment like this. But I promise you, without a word of a lie, it's the truth. We were going to Erie for a game on November the 23rd. And because of what I just explained to you and getting to know Jim Waters over the years, and he has meant a lot. He's a real mentor, even though I never worked for him in broadcasting, just by the way he conducts himself. And we're on the bus going to Erie, and I thought to myself, it's about time I told this to Jim Waters, because people in this world, and I know this sounds stupid and corny, but this is the God's honest truth, but we're always ready to criticize. We rarely take a moment to pay somebody a compliment or tell them what they've meant to you for whatever reason. So I said, when I get to Erie today, I'm going to make sure I go up to Jim and tell him how influential he has been on me, even from the distance, just watching him, the way he conducts himself, the way he treats people. And wouldn't you know, I get to Erie and I do see him before the game, but we're under the stands and he's off over in some corner with a couple of other guys, and they're looking at something in one of the storage areas. And I'm like, you know what? Jim's busy. I'll get him later, or I'll get him next time. And of course, as fate would have it, there wasn't a next time. He did pop into the booth, as he always does, to say hi, but we were on the air at the time. So it was a silent, you wouldn't have even known he was there because we were on the air. We shake hands. He walks out of the broadcast booth and I never saw him again. And then I hear the news that he has passed. So, I mean, it's way too late, but I guess the moral of the story is don't miss out on those opportunities. Don't waste them. If somebody means something to you, tell them. I really wanted to do that. Tell Jim that. And I'm kicking myself for not having done so. But that is the God's honest truth of how, really, I won't even say good, I'll say great, a man that he was. And we should all be half the man that Jim Waters was. Just a terrific guy. Just a terrific guy all around. And if you're wondering what all the outpouring of sympathy was about, that's just one small sense of it. He's been on this podcast before, and I'm not trying to shamelessly promote it, but you can go back and find the episode with Jim Waters. Have a listen for yourself. Spend 45 to 50 minutes. You'll hear it all. He's terrific. And thank you for indulging me in this little TED talk about Jim Waters.
Wow. Not much needs to be added after that, Mike. What a loss for the league. What a loss for his family and the Erie Otters. And we will remember him like he remembered all of us. And what a tribute, Mike. Not much more I can add to that.
That's a great way to put it, though. We'll remember him like he remembered all of us. He really did. Never, once he met you, he remembered your name. And sports in general need more owners like Jim Waters for sure. Okay, as we wrap things up, like we always do, it's time for our prospects of the week. I alluded to this earlier. One of us put way more effort into this week than the other, and I think that person that put more effort in was Dan Mahar. But start us off, Dansky. Who you got?
Well, I don't know. I this one made it easy for me too, Mike. I got to go with Lev Katzin on the Guelph Storm. Recently, a Penn State commit recently left the Green Bay Gamblers, the USHL, to sign with Guelph. Was a prodigious scorer in his U16 year. Projected potentially that way if he was ever going to come to the OHL, which was uncertain until the new ruling. 13 points in his first 6 games in the OHL. 6 games into his OHL season, he is already in the top 10 on Guelph Storm scorers. This is making a difference. So I think it's a reason to be optimistic in Guelph. What a great start for Lev Katzin is my prospect.
Attaboy, Lev. Love to hear it. Okay, so Michael Misa. Do you want me to tell you? But there's a reason. Like there's a reason. There's method to my madness that I've chosen Misa this week. First of all, he is riding a 14 game point streak during which he's picked up 33 points. Not too bad, right? 12 goals, 21 assists. But he's only been held off the score sheet one time in 29 games so far this season, averaging more than 2 points per. Dan alluded to this earlier. Like at some point we jump off the bandwagon or we start just stop singing his praises because there are so many praises to be sung. But the reason I brought up Misa this week is just to put him on your radar as if he wasn't already. He's got a 7-point lead currently on Porter Martone for the OHL scoring lead. And you see, Martone's going to go to the World Juniors and Misa is not. So Michael Misa between now and early January might just run away with the OHL scoring race. So throw him on the radar again right now before Christmas. Michael Misa is my prospect of the week.
Yeah, and I think he has a 21-point lead over his next closest teammate. If you want to talk about how dominant he is, just crazy. I thought you were going to pick him as your prospect of the week because the way he shoveled all those Bears back into the stands. No,
wow, like the guy can do everything, is what Dan's getting at. He can get suspended and come back and continue a point streak. All right, we are getting close. I can't believe we've got 1 weekend left before the Christmas break. So what Dan and I have decided to do, we decided to do this together, right, Dan? Like we agreed on this. We're going to give them a little treat for Christmas.
Sure.
Okay.
If they consider it a treat, yes.
Oh, come on. Who doesn't want to know what Dan and I think to be the 3 best logos, not unis, but logos in the Ontario Hockey League? And this came into our inbox a little while ago, and we'd already been thinking about it. So that's going to be on next week. Little fun, little Christmas present for you. You can find out what we think are the best 3 logos in the league. Start thinking of your own right now. We will also, of course, take a look at the teams we think to be active with the trade deadline so close now. You can't officially trade players who are away at the World Juniors, but we know deals get done. And either way, by the time we're back from Christmas, there's like 5-6 games left before trade deadline. So exciting time of year. So we'll break down some of that. And of course, the usual fun frivolity, the wraparound. But yeah, best 3 logos. I got 2 for sure. I'm still working on my 3rd, but
Question, a rules question. Can I pick the Belleville Bulls?
No.
All right.
No, in the league today.
I had to
No,
clarify.
only if I get the Cornwall Royals, and only because I want the Royals back in the league. Okay.
Okay, we'll add one historical best logo. How's that? You just heard our picks already.
Wow, 1 historical. Okay, yeah, you're right. Bulls, Royals, and 3 more coming next week. All right. That guy over there is Dan Mahar. Find him on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm Mike Farwell at Farwell_OHL on X. Please give us a like, subscribe, tell a friend about the OHL podcast. Check out our social media channels. We're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, and we're right here in your ears wherever you get your podcasts every single week. Thanks for listening to the OHL podcast.